boy. Welcome back to the Context Coaching Podcast. We are joined today by Jacob Rivers, man of many hats at the Viewpoint School, football coach, basketball coach, track coach, director of DEI, 11th grade dean. You name it, he does it. Jacob, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Excited to talk to you. So let's dive into your background. So the audience has some semblance of what we're going to talk about, but if you could take us through your background in athletics in general, how did you get into coaching, right? How did you get into sports? How has that influenced your professional career?
Yeah. So sports has always been a huge part of my life, partially because I've always latched on to competition. I like meritocracies. I like the fact that I can be better at something than somebody else. I like the cleanness of that. And I've latched on to sports all my life. I played everything that you can name just because I loved it. Up until the point where sports was the reason why I started getting to some of the schools that I had gotten into. I went from public school to private school in high school because I was a football player. I got into the college that I got into because I was being recruited as a football player. And honestly, my mindset was such that if it weren't for football, I was going to go into the military coming out of high school. So going into college, I really kind of saw myself as an athlete student more than anything else. And it was one of those things where in the back of my mind, I was always kind of thinking that I have to finish playing football, because if I don't, then they're going to find a reason to kick me out of the school, which, you know, some of that was real, some of that was in my own head. But ultimately I came to that come to Jesus moment that we all have, where 99% of us realize that we're not going professional, and dealing with that, and just kind of reconciling with my relationship with sports and how much I had depended on it, how much it was a crutch for me at certain times, how it let it define me, was a huge turning point for me. Coming out of college, I didn't know what I was going to do. I knew I wanted to keep playing if I could. I liked being around kids. I was a summer camp counselor in all the summers of my college career because it let me stay on campus so I could keep working out. And so I found this boarding school where, lo and behold, the triple threat model is teach, coach, and advise. I can coach because I could play. I could advise because I don't mind being around kids. And that teaching thing, I don't know what it is, but I'll figure it out. And so I signed up to go to the boarding school. And that was where I started coaching 3 seasons, teaching a full load of classes, and, you know, having my advisees and learning that kind of professional realm. And then it was after I had gotten thrown into the fire of teaching that I really started to kind of own my identity as an academic, right? Own my intelligence as a student in a way that I never really gave myself leeway to as an athlete. And so from there, it just kind of grew. And it was funny because the marriage of student athlete isn't the same in the professional world as teacher coach. So once I left that boarding school, it wasn't normal for a teacher to want to coach, for an administrator to want to coach, and to really push to do that. And I could never really stay off the field. You know, if I wasn't officially coaching that season, I would just kind of be hanging around, or I would be doing my own workout, and then the team would come and they'd be like, "Oh, Mr. Rose, what are you doing?" And so sports has always been this kind of consistent theme throughout my life. And in fact, since I was 5, there's only been one fall that I wasn't directly attached to a football team. And that fall, I was like, I was kind of lost. I was just drifting. I had all this time I didn't know what to do with. I was like free on Saturdays. But yeah, sports has always been a big part for me.
That's a lot. And what I mean by that is, for people that aren't listening, or that are listening that are not familiar with the boarding school model, you mentioned the triple threat of advise, teach, and coach. What you left out was work in the dorms, which is a whole other beast on top of that, which I jokingly refer to as your part-time job to pay the rent. after you do your full-time job, which is teaching and coaching and advising and whatever else they ask you to do, also known as other duties as assigned by the head of school in your contract. But that's neither here nor there. What I would love to dig into was your comment that I was an athlete student.
Yeah.
And then once I started coaching and teaching, I was finally able to embrace myself as an academic. We often run into a handful of our students in schools like ours that definitely fit the athlete student model. And it's often a journey before they graduate to get them to be a student athlete. And I find myself often with parents who are very concerned about their academic progress, where I describe them right now. Jimmy is a athlete student, and he will eventually be a student athlete as long as we stay the course and keep him involved. What have you found in your experience throughout all of your stops that sports has done to help with that shift rather than to hinder that shift in making academics a priority?
I think when we recenter athletes around something real, they level up their athletic performance, their academic performance, their personal performance. You can see athletes who do this right just in the attitude that they approach the sport with, right? How they show up on days that they don't have to, how they go hard in practice just consistently because it means something differently to them, right? So what I mean by all that is sports can be this jumping point as long as it's in your mind the right way, right? So when I identified myself as an athlete student, and what I see far too often, and part of this, just to take it a layer deeper than you even gave me, part of this is a racial dynamic that I felt more than I understood, right? Because as I kind of have a stereotypical background in a certain sense, in that I grew up in a rough part of town. I grew up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. I went to public schools. I hung out on the streets like I was there, but sports was a way forward for me and a way out in a lot of sense. I always thought of like walking across the draft stage, shaking the commissioner's hand or whatever, getting this first check that would allow me to pay a whole bunch of things that needed to be paid by my mama house, all those different kinds of things. So all that to say, I think a lot of times as athletes, we define ourselves as our performance in the sport because that's where we get the most direct feedback. And that's where we have the most tangible way forward, the most tangible path to whatever success that we're chasing, right? Which is sometimes a big pot of gold, which is sometimes just an image that we don't really understand. It's just something that we're chasing for the sake of success, power, all those things. And so because academics, it's a lot harder to see those steps forward, it kind of gets pushed to the side in favor of what I can see. So when you ask, what has sports done to help that? I think I've had, honestly, not many, but I've had one or two coaches that were able to tell me like, hey, your focus is wrong here, right? You got to shift your focus here. And honestly, I ran into those people a little bit too late, because in my mind, the recruiting process was one thing. I found out that it is not. I thought it was this true meritocracy when in a lot of cases it is not. And so it's the relationships that I had with specific coaches who were able to break through to me that kind of fundamentally shifted how I saw certain things that helped me with owning that academic side of myself.
Yeah, let's dig into that for a second since you brought it up. And the specific of I thought recruiting was X and it ended up being Y.
Yeah.
What lessons that you learned during that process yourself have you been able to lean on as you instruct the generation of student athletes that you're coaching now to try to help them see the Y, when I guarantee you most of them still believe the X because the youth sports industrial complex has led them to believe that? How can you offer a few very specific bullet points, let's call them, in regards to, hey, here's the perception and here's the reality. And this is something that as a coach, we need to be doing to help set our athletes up for success, if that is a dream of theirs.
Yeah. Strategy, right? Strategy. I'll give it to you in terms of a track metaphor, right? If I'm talking to sprinters and you want to go faster, what you're going to do is will yourself to go faster and tell yourself effort. What that actually does in real time is make you slower, right? So speed is actually efficiency and moving in such a way that all of your body parts are aligned and pushing you towards the finish line, making maximum effort out of your energy. Breaking down the metaphor, when you're just kind of blindly giving your all and going all out in all of your effort, you're not necessarily working towards a consistent goal. You're not necessarily getting to where you want to go to. So when I see kids that, I have a student who will come to off-season football workouts, great, but then go to his in-season track workouts, okay, and then go to another workout session with his out of school trainer for another workout at night. Okay, that's kind of a lot now, right? So we're not talking about the demand on your body, right? This is the same kid who wants to go to all of the college workouts and showcases that he can possibly find, right? Again, strategy tells us that you don't need to get to all of them, you need to get in front of certain people, right? How are you communicating with certain people so that they know you're there when you show up and that you can actually make contacts with them? How are you making the most out of the energy that you literally have so that you are giving your body time to recover and so that you're giving your muscles time to actually build as opposed to just working the thing out? And so what I learned and the advice that I would give is to make the most out of the effort that you're giving by attaching it to strategy of where you're trying to go, right? Because all too much anything will kill you, you know?
For sure. And I'm going to use that to springboard into what may come off as a soapbox of mine, because it is. What is your take and your experience as a coach and as an athlete for those that wish to play at the air quote next level, whatever that may be, and the benefits and or drawbacks to being a multi-sport athlete versus a single sport athlete?
Oh, that's huge. So talking about strategy again, right? So to get to the next level, you need so many things to go right. And being a multi-sport athlete allows you to look through multiple perspectives, right? And so when you come back to whatever sport you're putting your most time and energy in, or whatever sport you're choosing to pursue at that next level, because I think at some point you do have to make a choice. Although there are the Deion Sanders of the world, the Bo Jacksons of the world who can do multiple. I think LeBron is one of those people if he really tried to, but that's a different conversation. Specialization will come, right? But before you get there, being a multi-sport athlete is, to me, let me backtrack. I think we use the term athlete a little bit too much, right? I think if you're a really good football player, but you can only play football, you're not an athlete to me. You're a football player, right? I think athlete is somebody that I can put into any sport, any competitive environment, and give them a couple of practices, but eventually they're going to be competitive in that quickly, right? And so athletes are who we ultimately start to kind of revere and really praise for what they can bring to the court, because it's not any one thing. It's just how they approach the game, how they do everything. And I think playing multiple sports a lot is kind of one of the only things that allows you to see through different perspectives and be better at your sport in like this real tangible kind of way.
I love that answer for a variety of reasons, but specifically for the way in which you decide to define the word athlete, because I think you're right on in that sense that the more things that you try and participate in, you are building the muscle memory and other developing other ligature even in your mind to see the game differently, right? So going from, let's say, the basketball court to the swimming pool as a water polo player, you're going to see the game differently. Or if you grew up playing hockey, right, and then you go and start playing basketball, you're going to see this whole idea of the hockey assist at a much greater level than someone that's only played basketball, right? So I think those things are super important. I appreciate you bringing that up. as you entered the realm of coaching, and your athletic career ended, all of ours do at some point, some by choice, some not by choice, but you got to that point and you are now coaching, right? You're now wearing the whistle instead of responding to it. What did you realize right away that you had to figure out?
I had to figure out how to understand unathleticism. I knew immediately what I wanted to happen. I knew how to do it. I knew how to show it, but I didn't understand what it was that made you see something I did and still do it wrong, right? So I'm a cover two corner. My first job is to flatten out the defender. Flatten out number one receiver. I can't let this guy go outside of me. So my body has to be a wall. I'm going to shadow his outside shoulder, and I'm going to make sure that he goes inside. No matter how many times no matter how many different schools, no matter how many different teams I teach that lesson on, somebody at some point is going to get beat in cover two because the guy runs right outside of them and they didn't even touch him. So to me, it was like, I don't understand what you're not understanding, right? And it limited me as a coach because I could only coach the highest level of my team. Because if you didn't understand it and if you couldn't already kind of move in the way that I was seeing in my mind, then I don't know what you're doing wrong, right? And so what it made me do is kind of realize that I had to understand the fundamentals in a different way, not just so that I could do them, but so that I could explain them to somebody who had never interacted with them before.
In addition to that, because you're now, you've always coached multiple sports because you started as a boarding school teacher. Right. What would you say you've learned both coaching and watching other disciplines that you've been able to implement as you cross coach other sports? Do you have some specifics? And the intention of the question is, I think we get locked in our echo chamber of sport. If we can expand our lens and our perspective, there's a million different ways to do things that we probably haven't thought of, because as a basketball coach, I'm probably not going to watch tennis to see how to become a better coach. But can you share some things you've learned both by coaching multiple sports and by watching them in ways in which it's helped you grow as a coach?
Sure. I think I learn something every time I see somebody else coach, just in the way they build relationships with their players or maintain relationships with their players. But just to give you one very specific, tangible one, that first year that I was in boarding school, I go from football season to basketball season to track season. And in track, I very much expected to work with the sprinters because sprinting is what I did, it's what I know. So when I found myself coaching pole vaulters, it was a completely different thing. The best pole vaulter we had was a girl by the name of Sophie. Shout out to Sophie, wherever she is in the world. She was an excellent pole vaulter who had just started pole vaulting within the past 2 or so years. I was the second coach that she had, and she had only really had 2. And so I was trying to figure out how to work with her. One of the things that Sophie taught me, one of the things that coaching pole vault taught me, and just different sports taught me, was the importance of the relationship with the athletes, right? They will run through a wall for you as long as they know that you're on their side, right? And coming from a very stereotypical and traditional football background, it was always yell, 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 do this way, standards right now, kind of energy. But in pole vault, it wasn't like that. It wasn't a team anymore. It was more of an individual sport. And further, it was a sport that I had females that I was coaching for the first time. I had never coached females before. We can get into the difference of male-female sports later, but one of the things that I learned from pole vault was that I got the most out of all of my athletes when I checked in with them first, right? When I checked in with them, explained to them what the plan was for the day, and told them how we were going to go about it, I got so much more out of them than when I just kind of steamrolled them and try to go to content, trying to get you wherever I'm trying to go. And so building better relationships and leaving space to hear how my athletes are doing was a huge one.
And in addition to your own experience having to teach a new discipline, are there things that you've watched others do that you've tried to implement and either had failure or success that you could share that, hey, this is something great that, I mean, none of us come up with anything very often, but I mean, hell, I didn't steal this from football. I stole it from baseball and I use it at football every day.
Yeah. Along the same vein of those relationships, I saw who was a legendary girls lacrosse coach. Before the game, after the game, and like regularly through practice, she would do these circles and like they would be sitting for like 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes at a time, just building community, like talking about what went right, what went wrong, from like this real place where the coach is sitting in the circle with them. Everybody seems like they have equal airtime. If they want it, anybody can voice whatever they had. And it was like incredible to see how she fostered that community. And this team was winning regularly. Now, I tried my own version of that. It doesn't work for me the same way it works for her, just because of the way that she holds that space. But what I learned from that, and the nugget that I pull from that, is that they'll never undervalue the moments that you give them to build connections, right? They won't always take advantage of it in the same way that you want them to take advantage of it, but there's something that's gained by just offering that space. Sometimes it can happen on a bus going to somewhere. It can happen intentionally on the field, but when you set the intention for it, it yields better results.
Absolutely. And I think often as coaches, and you've already spoken to this idea of you need to check in before you deliver content. And that's more of a teaching approach than a coaching approach, if we were to dig into the minutia of those words, right? But those of us that have taken the moment to do that, either collectively as a group or individually with athletes as they're doing warm-ups, definitely allow for that growth. And you use the term holding space, which for those of you that aren't familiar, is intentionally creating the opportunity to have whatever community or individual check-in that you need without thinking about the next thing that you need to be at, right? You're actually facilitating this area, this space for people to have these conversations, which is super important. I'm glad you brought that up. Go ahead.
Can I give you one more point off of that?
Please do.
Right? Holding that space is super important because it allows for you to be on the same page about what the problem is, right? I think as coaches, sometimes we jump to a solution that we see that we've worked on. Like I can be watching film, trying to figure out how to shut down this one receiver, right? I'm working on it. I figure out a plan and I come to practice and say, okay, here's how we're going to do this. We're going to combo. Here's the code word and all that stuff. That's a solution that I spent days working on. But if I can introduce them to the problem and show them that here's what the problem is, here's what we're trying to fix, and help and let them walk with me through the stages of figuring out that problem, or even if they don't walk through the stages, but they understand what the problem was, then when it comes time to implement the solution, they would never do something as silly as let this guy get a clean outside release, because they understand that that's exactly what causes the problem, right? And so just, I wanted to emphasize that point because that was something huge that I didn't understand that I was even doing at the beginning of my career.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. This idea of problems, solutions, and I'll add another one, dilemmas. In regards to a dilemma is something that has to be managed and a problem can be solved. What examples would you have of that as a coach? Let's say at your particular institution, time and space and career, relative to maybe a previous stop or others that you've seen, right, that are unique to your situation, but that you've had to manage because you can't solve it and you have to take into account as you build your team versus problems that you can address, that you can get air quote fixed and keep it moving. Do you have any examples of that you've had to figure out that has forced you to become better or different in your coaching? Sure,
that's a good question. I coach lacrosse now for the first time. All the sports I've ever played, all the things I've ever done, this is the first time I'm coaching lacrosse. And lacrosse is a fascinating sport. I actually love it a whole lot, because it's like this combination of a bunch of other things, which lacrosse is probably older than those sports. So those sports actually pull from that, but that's a different conversation. Anyway, a lacrosse practice, a lacrosse game, and the way that my team is run, and it's not my team, I'm an assistant coach, right? But because of the way that the staff works, I feel like it is my team, which is what you want from your assistant coaches. It's more of a player run environment, right? We count on the players to get practice started. We count on the players to lead certain drills and things. And there's a lot of player agency. The dilemma in that is that players don't always know and don't always intentionally do what is best for them, right? Sometimes they can know something is right, but I don't necessarily want to do it, right? I know that I need to warm up before I start running, and my hamstrings need to be stretched, but I'm just going to kind of go through the motions on this just so I can get to the fun stuff, right? We had a game the other day. We actually won the game by about 5, but according to our head coach, and I would have agreed with this, we should have won by like 15, right? So it was one of those times where, okay, you won, but we need to talk about what the lesson is from this. The message I gave to him and the management of this dilemma to me is that it's not a mistake what happens at the end of a week, right? It's the result of all the decisions that we make throughout the week, right? So when you make the decision to use your stick to do a sword fight instead of going and picking up doing a ball hunt, well, that's a decision that you made that is showing up in the results of today, right? And so it's always constantly these small decisions that we're making, and you get to decide. Like this isn't, I don't get to play. Like I'd love to, right? I'd shave in a second to be out there with you all, but they're not going to let me. So this is going to be your team. So you get to decide, what do you want this season to be, right? Once you decide what you want that season to be, make sure all of your actions line up with what that intention is, right? And so reminding them of that intention and holding them to a standard that I agree is important with them, right, is important, so that I can manage the dilemma, which can't be solved, which is the player dynamics. They have to want it themselves, right? If they don't want it, I can't want it for you, no matter how much I try.
Yes, and that would be the same at probably every institution and with every team.
Yeah.
In that, if you can cultivate a way, and this is the dilemma, right? To have a player-led group, yeah, you're always going to outperform the coach-led group. But navigating and creating a culture where that is both allowed, yeah, and it's functional and not dysfunctional is very complicated. And it's always, right, the golden ring that you're chasing to, yeah, be great as a team.
Yeah, and it's either catching lightning in a bottle or an intentional system that you spent years developing.
Right? Absolutely, yes. And let's talk about that. Mm-hmm. In your role as a head coach at whatever level, and in your role as an assistant coach, mm-hmm, what do you do that has the largest impact and ripple effect, mm-hmm, on the culture you're trying to build that you just described? Yeah. That you will take with you at whatever next coaching stop it is, be it the fall season or be it at a different school?
Yeah. I'd say intentionality and having a plan. I think because of the implicit messages that come along with coaching in terms of it being second to academics and it being just all of the coaching roles that I've had have been stipended, right? So it's a stipend position. It's not necessarily part of your salary. It leads you to saying that coaching is not prioritized in my list of things to do, right? So it's all about how much I want to do it. So as an assistant coach, and I hate to admit it, but sometimes as a head coach, particularly when I was younger, I would show up and, we can figure out a practice plan. I know we need to run. I know we need to put up shots. I know we need to do a defensive drill and we can compete. Okay, let's figure that out on the fly. Now, the thing with being unintentional is that because I didn't have a plan in my head that I was working off, I couldn't communicate a plan to them so they couldn't know what to expect. And in the I would miss out on moments to build culture and to build community and to build a standard, because I'm using that time to think about what's coming next. What am I about to do next? How do I transition from one thing to the next, right? And what you're doing is you're utilizing all of your time well, right? Because those transition times, they add up. Those insecure times, they add up. And the players see in you uncertainty. And when your players see uncertainty, when your players think you don't know what's going on, then they ad-lib in ways that they should not be ad-libbing, right? And they leave you exposed in ways that you knew, but you didn't communicate because you weren't intentional about the design of your practices. And so you didn't have the latitude to instruct, because you were instructing how to do a drill that you should have already set up.
No, absolutely. And I think, to your point, every one of us has had to show up in ad lib at some point, especially if you are a full-time teacher. But if that is your normal MO, it's not going to have the results that you want. And I like the idea of sharing that you don't just have to intentionally build activity into your practices. You have to have thematic goals you're trying to reach that you can scaffold for over time, that may or may not have anything to do with the sport you're actually coaching.
Right.
Behavioral standards, like you mentioned, right? How do you communicate? How do you interact with others? How do you show up as your best self, right? In the John Wooden era, how do you put your socks on, right? Whatever that might be, is super important. If you don't think through those things, they end up biting you down the road. What would you say if you could offer perspective, not necessarily advice, to others listening, of the difference between the head coaching role and the assistant role, in a few bullet points for people that may be sliding over 18 inches to the left, either direction?
So the difference in head coach versus assistant coach is that the buck has to stop somewhere, right? We are, I think the assistant coach head coach relationship works best when the assistant coach feels a sense of ownership over the team and over instructing the team towards our common goal, right? So making sure that we're on the same page about what our goal is. Now, when it comes to how to get to that goal, that should be a collaborative process where you take in all the information that you can from people's experiences, from outside sources, from whatever you have. But ultimately, you're going to have to commit to one path forward. Now, the head coach is the person that gets to make that decision, right? Everybody else gets a vote. It can be as much of a democracy as you'd like it to be, but at the end of the day, a decision has to be made for the sake of consistency for the team and actually executing whatever plan you're trying to get done, right? Go ahead.
No, I think I was thinking as you were talking, the easiest way to summarize it is you go from a recommending body who is making suggestions to making decisions.
Yep. To making hard decisions too, and holding people to a standard. And I think just to give you tangible tips, right? Being ready to make that decision, but also being clear and communicating what roles people are responsible for, and letting them sink or fail, right? I used to have, I had a head coach who, as his assistant, he would give me a task, tell me to do it, but then if he felt like I wasn't going to do it, or if he felt like it wasn't going to be done on time, or if he felt anything, he would just do it himself, right? To the point where I would do this work to have this thing done, but then he would have his own way of doing it that completely overshadowed mine. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not gonna do this thing because you're gonna do it your way, and we're gonna have to go with your way. So I'll just wait till you do it, and then we can go with it that way. Let's do that. Your assistant coaches have to be empowered, because ultimately they have different relationships than you. They can feel different comments than you. They can say things differently than you can sometimes. And you absolutely need them to be 100% on the same page as you are if you're going to hit the success that you intend to.
Absolutely. And I think the other funny thing about that, especially the part you just brought up at the end there, was the idea of they're going to have different relationships. And earlier in the journey of this pod, in one of the first 10 episodes, one of my good buddies was like, oh, it's funny how the head coach's van is always empty and everybody rides in the assistant coach's vans when you go places, right? And it's right, because ultimately, right, the head coach has to make those tough decisions, and sometimes they're going to ruffle feathers, and the kids need those other relationships to feel whole. And to your point, the coaches need their roles defined in the same way that we do for our athletes. And the more clarity in those roles, not just for them, but for the athletes who need to understand them. It's the same as if you paint a picture for all of your players, right? Hey, Jimmy, shoot as many threes as you want. You're not allowed to dribble, right? Whatever that might be. If everybody knows, now they can play with Jimmy and know exactly what to expect. Right. How would you articulate in each of the sports you coach quickly what those roles might look like for assistant coaches?
I don't think it changes too much by sport. I think it's just about specificity, and I think it has to do with knowing your weak points, right? My weak point is I have some organizational things that I'd love to be better at. I don't love fielding parent comments all the time, especially like in the heat of certain moments, right? I could task an assistant coach with any number of things, right? So your job is to make sure that we do our warm up well. On game day, I need you to be in the box to take the first group out 10 minutes before, make sure the second group is out, right? However specific you can get, and I think the big point there is know what you're weak at, know what you are willing to commit yourself to, and know what you just have to do. Right? There's some things you just have to do, but I don't think there's anything in particular that an assistant coach can or can't do for your team.
Agreed, and I think it's a journey to get to a place of confidence where you can delegate and let go of some things. And that's hard. And I think everybody gets there at their own pace, but it seems like the people that are both most fulfilled and least stressed out are the ones that have got to the point where they can get as much off of their plate as possible so that they can worry about the big picture of things.
Which is a place that a lot of people don't get to, because power dynamics and ego run rampant in coaching constantly.
100%. And on that note, let's do this. How has your approach to coaching changed over the years that allows you to make that statement?
I think I've become more okay with, or more secure in the knowledge that I have, and less trying to cover up for the knowledge that I don't have. I'll tell you when I don't know something, right? Because I know that if it's something I need to figure out, I'm going to go figure it out. I know that it's something that you might have experience with, so I can just ask you a question and start getting answers and let you know that, hey, whenever you see me doing this thing, I'm doing it from a place of not having experience with it. So if you see me doing something wrong, please tell me something differently, right? And that's no matter what position I have. When I was the head pole vault coach on campus with the least pole vault experience, I had to humble myself to a point of fielding the knowledge from the group that was there and available and ready to use, and making the most out of it for the good of our team, right? That ultimately became my job, so that I didn't get in the way of our team's success, because your team is going to take on your personality. Your team is going to take on your limitations. So if you're limited because you won't ask a question, you won't admit that you need help, then your team is going to show that in critical moments on the field.
Yes, and to your point, getting to a place of security in what you do know and what you don't, and being okay with that is often hard from a standpoint of pride and ego. And pride and ego ultimately do more harm than good, especially as we try to empower and lead young people.
Yeah, but it's a trip athletically, because that pride and ego is more or less what got you to the stage that you ultimately got to. So if you were that D1 athlete, I talked to an Olympian one time, and I was so amazed that they had made it to like this peak of the mountain that I had never in my mind been to. But what drives them there is this dogged determination, this pride, this ego that says, yes, I can do this, right? Yes, I can accomplish this, which is necessary in one hand and a liability in the other. So you need balance.
And I would imagine as you talk to the people at that level, they all had coaching along the way. So they were able to reach out and say, I have the drive and the determination to do this, but I need help.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap with this. What is something, and it doesn't have to be about coaching. Hell, it can be in a classroom. It can be, as you're exercising on your own, whatever realm you want to spin this into. But what is something that you have most recently changed your mind on? And it's more of for lack of a better word, a growth mindset question in regards to how do we constantly evolve into our better selves, but something that you can just think about and touch and be like, I used to be over here and now I'm over here and here's what.
Yeah. Pacing. I think I've learned that. So running, right? You said it could be my personal workout, how I coach, how I teach. All of it is the same answer to me, but it came to me as I was running, because pacing wise, if I sprint, I can sprint really hard for 100 yards and be gassed by the end of it to the point where I need like minutes to recover, like maybe even longer if you really pushed it. However, that's when I'm running at the fastest I can run. That's not a pace that I can keep up with. But if I run at the right pace, I can more or less run forever, right? Like Forrest Gump took off, but it wasn't because he was running super fast. He was running at an efficient pace, right? So if I can maintain my form and run at such a pace that is comfortable for me and that is in line with my breath and in line with my my stamina, then I can keep that going forever. What that changed for me, that taking that metaphor into teaching, into coaching, right? There's always something that you can be doing right now that keeps you in line with where you're trying to go, right? And it's not about pushing yourself to the very ends of your limits and being exhausted at the end, because that exhaustion is now time that you take from yourself when you could be still preparing, right? Because now you have to recover. Now I have to take that time to recover. Whereas if I'm properly paced, I'm just always going, right? I'm just getting there. And you might get there faster, but I'm going to be so consistent that I'm going to catch up to you eventually, and I'm going to pass you, because once I catch up to you, you're going to try to restart. I'm just going. And to the point where I'm not even so much considering my competition. I'm so focused on who I am, what I'm doing, and how I am preparing myself to get to where I need to go, that competition comes and goes, but I can stay consistent because I'm on my pace.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And where it took me from a thought process was when, we go into the gym and work out in the weight room, whatever it might be. It's funny because we'll be in there with the kids in the summer and they'll work so hard, they'll throw up. And it's like, how come you never do that? And it's like, I know how to pace myself. Like, I know where the edge is. And you guys don't seem to get that yet. So it's like last time I had that experience was probably 10 years ago for a very good reason.
Hey, throwing up during a workout is a young man's game.
Exactly. And it doesn't mean we don't still work hard. We just know where the line is. Anyway, Coach, great having you on. Thanks for being here today. I know you're busy. You got to go teach a college class here in a few minutes, but I wanted to say thanks for jumping on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.